Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, I'm looking forward to this conversation. Now, let's do some time traveling. Let's go back 14 years ago to January 14th, 2006. Does that date ring a bell for you?
Yes, the first day I turned pro, very excited. Man, I wanted to turn pro when I was 18. I turned pro when I was 20. And man, that's yeah, that date changed my life.
Now, you fought, this was at the Palais des Congrès in Hull, Quebec, Canada. The league was called Freedom Fight. The event's theme was Canada versus the US. And that night you fought Shane Savage, a
Yeah.
quote unquote catch wrestler, no relation to Macho Man Randy Savage, unfortunately. And he's from Barra, Ontario. Now, speak to us about that experience as a whole in terms of it being your first ever, your debut into the world of mixed martial arts. What were you like? What comes to mind when you think about that fight? What's the
That
first visual?
the first visual. That was like, yeah, that was like the beginning, and it was all about the buildup, because I was very cerebral about my debut and me fighting MMA when I was 14. So I mean, 6 years before that, I had it all written down in my goal setting. I did that when I was 14 years old, and back then it wasn't like nowadays that everybody's like writing in it down, or goal setting, whatnot. And then yeah, it's like I have the paper somewhere buried in there. I'm like 14 years old, little chicken scratch, and be like, okay, like, train Muay Thai, train Jiu-Jitsu, fight Jiu-Jitsu tournaments, fight kickboxing fights, and then we'll build it up, and then I'm gonna turn pro, and then I'm gonna make it to the UFC after that. So I wrote that when I was like 14 years old.
That's remarkable. I mean, you visualized it, you
Oh, you
documented
jam.
it. Yeah, I know it's frozen a little bit. um,
Oh, you're back.
Oh, is that okay? I'm good. Okay, so I'll ask the question here. That's remarkable because you wrote it down when you were 14. You meditated on it and you visualized it, and it happened. Of course, it happened. And I mean, I was there for that fight, and many people were. Obviously, there was a huge crowd at the Palais des Congrès, and all I remember was just how hyped up the crowd was and
Yes.
how action packed the match was. Lead us through the match from what you recall, like in terms of major moments in this particular match.
I can't. I froze up. It's all a blur. Garmamie.
Really, eh? For real?
The fight jitters got me. Oh yeah, I'm bad with that. I tunnel vision, and it's all a blur, and I go on autopilot, and then sometimes I go back to the corner and be like, hey, am I winning? Like I always say that, like in every round. I sit in the corner and I coach, am I winning? Like, how am I doing? Like, what happened? But yeah, definitely action packed. I have that fight on tape. I think it was like Michael Landsberg commentating on it, TSN. It was a huge deal. Walking out to the fight, I don't know if you saw that, but Shane Savage had a lot of teammates and guys that were up from Barrie, Ontario, and one of them tried to trip me.
Oh
So
no,
I
I
had
don't. I was there. I don't recall seeing that.
Yeah, I had to step over his foot, and I was the first one to go out. Usually I get my coaches to go out first and I follow them. But for some reason, I was like, okay, I went out down the catwalk and then through the crowd, and one of them tried to trip me as I'm trying to enter, go up to the to the ring. So yeah, I was like, what's going on? Yeah, I was like, yeah, it's definitely, and then the fight itself is like a blur. I just went on autopilot, full adrenaline, and yeah.
I mean, I was, to be honest, like that was the first. I think that was the first time I'd seen. Obviously, I'd heard of you and the gym at the time, so it was the first time I saw it, it in action. And there were moments in the fight where Shane appeared to gain momentum, but you turned
Oh
it
yeah.
around, and again the audience was so invested in the match on both sides. And I mean, it was I think it was a remarkable, exciting debut, man. And it led to a very interesting career, obviously, not just in
Yeah.
MMA and other sports. And we're going to dive into that. But
I remember, just to touch base on that. I
sure.
remember the crowd, they would hear my head bounce like a basketball, because the ground and pound, like he ground and pounded me, like I think it was like 4 minutes and 50 seconds the fight lasted, And then the ricochet, like that ripple effect of me getting hit by the head and then bouncing off the canvas, you could hear and echo it through the Palais de Congrès. Yeah, and then and then I, it's kind of like a come from behind, kind of like he was dominating me for the whole fight. I pushed through it. I showed heart, and I was able to get the win later on. But yeah, we laid it all on the round for like that 4 minutes and 50 seconds. And then I was pretty badly concussed after that. I was puking blood in the back room after. And it was a very, very tough welcoming to the MMA world, especially with the ground and pound. Me coming from Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so there's no ground and pound like that. I had no wrestling at all, no judo, no nothing. I had like two pieces of the puzzle. I was missing the big component, the wrestling, and another one, which is the ground and pound. And then as you said, he was like the catch wrestler, so Josh Barnett style, and then he just dribbled my head like a basketball.
No, it was fascinating. I'm glad you mentioned heart, because that's exactly what the audience witnessed, especially with the comeback. It was for real, like the momentum completely shifted there, and it was very melodramatic with the audience. Yes. Because you have to be there to feel the energy there, being like as a spectator of any of these combat sports, to really understand how much the vibe in a room really creates a buzz that you'll never forget. In addition to that, you mentioned he's a catch wrestler. In my mind, I found that really interesting because, we know the history of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu versus, generally speaking, versus catch wrestling. So that was a theme that was running in my mind, and I found interesting. And even your pre-fight interview, there were no signs of any, it didn't appear like you were nervous or, am I cutting out?
No.
I'm still there. Okay. I was just, we're doing this via Zoom, folks, so apologize for the connectivity issues. But what I was saying is, even in the pre-fight interviews, it was really interesting because you were clearly very young back then. This was like 14 years ago, but you delivered it, in a confident way that is what you had to say to the interviewer. And you went in there and you delivered. And overall, one last question regarding that. If you could go back in time and tell your former self something before that match, what would it be? What advice would you give your former self?
I would say train the wrestling and then work the jiu-jitsu with strikes. The ground and pound and the wrestling is such a big component. I had a great conversation with Gracie about MMA, and I feel for our beliefs is like the wrestling is that connection that the striker or the grappler needs. And for me, I had Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai. I had no connect. I didn't have that brick, like that, or that glue, I guess. I had the two bricks, but I had no glue to put it together. And having the takedown option, as you know, it's like, if you want to take it to the ground, you take it to the ground if you have better wrestling. Or if you want to keep it standing, you keep it standing if you have the better wrestling. You kind of have that pick a little bit, that's such a big part. And with Gracie, I remember having a chat with him. Is like, good wrestling and good grappling skills, you're set. Or good wrestling and good striking skills, you're set. But if you're missing that wrestling, it can be a long night for you. So if I would go back to that, I trained fitness, I cut with the weight, no problem. It was my first cut at 150. I made it at 152 instead of 155, so overshot it. So I'd probably tell myself not to stay too long in the sauna, but definitely train the ground and pound aspect, the jiu-jitsu with strikes. When we roll at the gym at the time, like it was so new to us, to all the team, and myself and Nick were the first ones to turn pro out of that gym. And definitely to add the strikes and the jiu-jitsu changes the whole game.
For sure. And we're going to move into the topic of wrestling and other grappling sports. Actually, one of the reasons why I'm interviewing you is because I've been today, it's late at night. It's like 10 o'clock on a Monday. A few days ago, I think I saw, over the last couple of weeks, I've been seeing some of your videos on social media where I see you doing a lot of uchikomi and drilling a lot of what appears to be judo. You're actually training in judo. And I was just curious to know what motivated you to train in judo because obviously you're Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, which is a major achievement in of itself. You're, you know, Japanese Jiu-Jitsu black belt. You fought in the UFC, one of, I think, the first MMA fighter in the Ottawa Gatineau region to have been booked and fought in the UFC, and we'll get into that. So all this to say, what I'm framing here is someone who has a successful career professionally and amateurly as well in martial arts. You retired from competition, yet, and you're teaching. You own a gym. You and Nick own 2 gyms, I believe. Why are you training in judo now? Well, what's the story in the context there? I find it really interesting.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So remember that goal sheet I was telling you about when I was 14 years old? So I had all my listed black belts I wanted to achieve. And it was, you know, traditional jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And funny enough, I have it written down, judo will be my last black belt. And I even said, I'll start that when I'm 40 years old. Wow. And I didn't know judo. I was 14 years old, 15 years old at the time. And I didn't know, out of all the sports, you know, or the martial arts, like judo is one of the hardest style. So I'm thinking, I'm like, man, there's no way I can start doing judo and going for my belts at 40. I should have started way before that. And I just got really into it, training with my first judo instructor. His name is Sylvain. He's from France, judo competitor, black belt, amazing judoka. And then he kind of ignited that on top of me. I want my 4th black belt, my last black belt, because I have a karate black belt as well, to be judo. And then I'm done for black belts. Now I'm not going for that. And what's exciting too is I believe at brown belt, we have to compete to be able to earn your black belt. So I put on my white belt again. It's the best feeling ever. And I'm so excited to start my judo journey. Funny enough, I put it out there in the universe that I wanted, you know, to train black belt. And so far in about, I think I've been being very serious about my judo game for about almost 2 years now. And I have a France judo black belt, Cuban 3rd degree national coach black belt, Jose, that I'm sure that you know. I have a Polish black belt, a Brazilian judoka black belt, and one that just came last week right from Morocco, just moved to the country, black belt competitor. He's actually Africa Cup world champion, judo black belt from Morocco. So I'm like, it's so funny how I put that out in the universe, and then like all these judo black belts are coming at the gym wanting to train jiu-jitsu, and I'm like, hey, can you help me out? You know,
that's remarkable. And of course, there's a lot of judo players who are cross training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because they need what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has to offer, and vice versa for judo, as far as the tachiwaza aspect of grappling, which Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu can greatly benefit from, and vice versa as far as the niwaza aspect of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, even though both styles standalone, no pun intended, are you know, complete in their own ways. You know, I'm not saying they're not. There's a variety of different opinions floating around there. But what I want to ask you before we dive into further into judo, I find it really interesting. You keep mentioning, you know, what you did when you were 14 as far as documenting this journey. Take us back to when you were 14. Actually, take us back to, if you don't mind, because I think it's part of the story. Take us back to when you were 13 and 14. What was happening? What motivated you to set these major goals? And looking back now, why do you still honor your goals from almost, you know, half? Like you're how old are you again? You don't mind?
I'm 35.
You're 35. So this is going, let's do the math here. 11 years ago? No, 20.
20.
11 years ago. Sorry.
Yeah, that's 20.
20 years ago. You're still honoring what you wrote down. Tell us what was happening in your mind. Where were you at? What was going on?
So obviously going into high school, you know, I always joke around and say I couldn't sing or dance. That's why, you know, I'm stealing that from Rocky. But yeah, I just fell in love with the martial arts. My first martial art was Shotokan karate. And then funny enough, at the time, I believe it was when like I got tested for my green belt. My Sensei Miguel Moreno and Sensei Kurt Kelly, you're given this sheet to fill out some like goals that you have in life and in martial arts and so on and so forth. And I really fell in love with the whole thing. And I was like in Elmer, it was the only martial art dojo that was there. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna get a good base, get my karate base, get that discipline, and after that, I'm gonna move on to maybe some ground fighting. And then that's when I linked up with Owama at the time for the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and try to combine. And then Jean-Yves Thériault was a big influence in my kickboxing. So I was like, reaching for everything and trying to build myself up. It was all a build up to be able to fight MMA one day. And I set that goal. I just fell in love with the sport, watching, Ken Shamrock and Tito Ortiz and Tank Abbott and all the guys, from there. So I knew what kind, I wanted to be well-rounded, and I knew that was the big thing. So I wanted to do the build-up. And then on that questionnaire sheet was like writing down all your goals. And I have it written down. I was like, okay, step 1, become well-rounded, fight MMA, become a champion. Everybody's going to know my name and want it to be taught by me. Open a dojo and then pass it on to the next generation. I have that written when I was 14, 15. And funny enough, I even wrote Make It to the UFC. And at the end of the high school, there's this album that you get a friend to write a little blurb about you, and you have your picture for the when you graduate.
Right, the
yearbook.
Yeah.
So my friend said in there, he's like, watch out for Mark, to watch him at midnight for like UCC fights. Like back in the days, they all used to like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m.
Yeah.
And then, watch out for his name. He's going to make it to the UFC. So not only I told myself as a goal, I wanted to make it to the UFC, but my friend put that in the yearbook. And then my whole high school knew about my goal. And then funny enough, 10 years exactly later, I was walking down to the octagon for my first UFC fight in Vegas. So
man, that's
crazy.
That is incredible, man. And I mean, you wrote this down 21 years ago. It took me a while to do the math, folks. It took me 21 years. Anyways, but no, you wrote that down 21 years ago. And more importantly, as you can imagine, many people have different goals in their lives, and only, a small percentile, I'm generalizing here, can actually, execute on these goals for a variety of reasons. And I mean, you've set life goals at that age, and you were able to honor them, and that's really remarkable. We'll get back to that in a second. Let's jump back to, in terms of judo goals. I think you mentioned one of the goals was obviously to attain a black belt in the sport of judo. What else would you say are your goals as far as training in judo? Because you have such a range of other disciplines under your experience under your belt, that like, what are some of your judo goals beyond the belt?
Definitely, I like I said, this will be my last black belt, but the road and the journey is very exciting. As you know, like a white belt, everything is new, everything is exciting. And me putting on the white belt again and learning judo from my senseis, my teachers that we have here in Ottawa is a big privilege, and I love it. And as goals, like enjoying the journey, going for my yellow belt and all the way. And I was so happy I got this curriculum, the syllabus from Judo Canada. And then, obviously there's, the black belt that you have to test as a brown belt. You have to enter judo competition. So I was like, wow, that's amazing. I definitely want to go that route. I know there's practitioners that done judo that haven't been, doesn't compete, and you get, in the different path for the judo black belt. But I'd like to be able to earn it on the mat. And that's, I find so great. I think karate, taekwondo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu should take a page out of the judo book and be like, hey, you want your black belt? Well, guess what? You have to compete, in that martial art. That makes so much sense for me. So I'm excited for as goals to do that. I find myself though, because I have that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training and experience, it's not clean, nice judo technique. And I'm a perfectionist, but on top of that, I have a lot of bad habits from training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and doing half fast, osotogari or whichever techniques like that. It's like the judo is so I'm having a hard time undoing a lot of bad habits that I have. So I think I'm going to be sticking a while for white belt and so on and so forth. But I'm okay. I'm enjoying the journey. Like I said, it's my last black belt, and I want to cherish learning. And the main thing too I want to be learning is, I'm having a hard time as well, but I'm practicing, is my Japanese terminology. So I want to know a big influence that was for my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was John Danaher. And every class I teach in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at our gym, I always tell the students, it's like, you have a blue belt in BJJ, but how are you going to take the fight to the ground? How are you going to be able to show all these techniques? And I always teach either a wrestling technique or a judo technique to first start the class. And then once we hit the mat, then I teach, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu curriculum. But I make it a point, just like John Danaher, who's taught me a lot of my Jiu-Jitsu, he always starts standing and teaches a throw or a wrestling technique, and then he moves on to the ground. So I want to,
Wow.
I want to emulate that, and that's always been my go-to. A lot of students love it, and the students that don't like it, well, they suck it up and do it anyways.
That's dude, that's fascinating that you integrate that in jiu-jitsu as far as the stand-up portion. I think I commend you on that. I think that's outstanding for your students, because as we all know, these matches start standing, and building that confidence and that ability to execute a throw, a trip, a takedown, whatever variation is important. I know that generally speaking, quickly, I'll just mention, people are concerned about sometimes with stand-up technique, the risk of injury is there, but generally, it is, right? It can happen. And reality is, injuries happen in Niwaza as well. But if the environment is generally, like, if you have a coach like yourself, I'm sure, who's keeping a keen eye on students and encouraging, first of all, having good break falls is part of the formula, and creating a climate where safety is in mind as far as the stand up and the ground. And I actually want to get into some of the advantages you have as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsuka transitioning to judo. I think you have more a lot to offer, obviously, because of that experience. As far as the Niwaza portion, obviously, you're saying you're a perfectionist, and you want clean judo, which is a really which is an awesome sort of goal to have. I would imagine, to have that sort of you're emphasizing technique over strength and poor gripping or whatever. So you're aiming high for your goal,
and learn the Japanese terminology too. I'd like to do that a lot. That's something that John Danaher does often too, calling, and even the Newaza, calling all the techniques by the Japanese. It's fun studying that and learning that. And with the judo, I want it clean. I tell all my judo teachers, they're like, oh, you shouldn't do, arai goshi because you give your back, right? But I'm like, no, I want to be judo black belt. I want to be judo black belt, clean, real judo black belt. So forget about giving the back and this and that. I want the ippon.
Nice. And it's really cool because you have such an interesting variety of practitioners there. You mentioned someone from Poland, a judoka from Poland, from France, from Morocco, from Cuba. And it's a global sport, and some regions of the world have their own style of wrestling that's integrated in the judo, and you see that in the gripping and some of the lifts. Like, I asked you on Facebook because I saw you do Tayatoshi, and I'm like, man, can you do a Uranagi? And I couldn't believe what you answered back, because it was a very it was very, like, you're a humble person. I respect that, because you said something along the lines of, like, nope, not yet. I'm following what my teachers are telling me to train, as far as which throws to practice, and you don't want to jump the gun and go and do lifts and Uranagi, which I think goes to show a lifelong martial artist who knows how he needs to learn, and it's usually 100% listening to your coach. Now, moving on now, there's a lot I want to ask you, because we can go in a few different directions, but you're Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and what are some of your advantages, do you think, as far as transitioning into this new sport? You also practice wrestling as well. What are some of your advantages as a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, learning a new style like judo?
I find the advantages, they're hard because it's so different, right? It's like it's night and day, just like wrestling. You go on your back, it's the pin, right? Same thing with ippon. And Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is you never give your back, right? So for the newaza, like for the groundwork, it's a constant battle. I've been working a lot from like turtle and working like the real judo stuff. Like if my judo throw fails, then I go for the turtle, suck the clock away, don't let him choke me, and then we can go back to standing. So try to implement that game a little bit. But for advantages, I mean, with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that I've learned, I've touched a bit, like again, like John Danaher, teaching me, some sumigeshi, sacrifice throw. He's big on that. And then shoulder throw, ippon snagi, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I feel from my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu training, I've touched it, but like I said, it's not clean judo. It's judo for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is very different.
Wow.
But advantages, I mean, obviously the newaza, be able to like scramble, be able to, work the chokes. I've been studying a lot of judo on tape, watching a lot of the championships, and a lot of my judo senseis are telling me, okay, we'll go watch this guy or go watch that guy in competition. So it's very exciting. I've seen a lot of like cool, like bow and arrow chokes from judokas. I meant to ask you that because you know more judo than me. So
not necessarily.
I think so. What belt are you?
I'm a green belt, but I haven't I haven't practiced in quite some time. But anyways, ask your question. I'll see if I know.
Yeah. So with the submissions, with the newaza, I feel like a lot of judokas, they don't tap. They all go to sleep. And I'm wondering, is it because they're not? I mean, their warm up most of the time is newaza or something, depending which dojo. And I just wonder, like, why don't they ever, like, I've seen a lot of judokas go out and the ref doesn't even like pick them up, nothing. He just like stands there, like waits for the guy to like go from unconscious to conscious, and then awards the point to the match to that. So, and then with broken arms too, and stuff
you
like
mean
that.
In competition you're talking
in
about?
Competition, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, you're referring to like elite level international competitors?
Yes.
Yeah, it's funny. You're right. There's and I'm generalizing. I mean, to be honest, I'm in no position to really truly answer that. I'm more of a fan and a casual observer. But from what I've seen and read, it's a fight, man. It's they're in a gi, and for us in our generation, when we think of a fight, of course, what comes to mind is mixed martial art, which is the application of all these different styles together. And visually, the visual of someone getting kicked in the face via knee, fist, elbow, or foot, what I mean, is more damaging visually. But judo is a very, very demanding, tough fight, and many people would rather, go out cold as far as you get choked out because they don't want to tap. I think a lot is at stake when we think of these combats or this particular combat sport, because it is, more widely practiced than any other amateur combat sport in the world. Like judo's reach globally is incredible. The number of practitioners, recreational in addition to like high elite level, it's remarkable to see. I think at the last Olympics, you had 340 wrestlers competing in wrestling, and judo had 360. So I think technically it is the most active combat sport in the world. But to answer your question, I think it's a very tough, demanding sport. From what I've seen, even locally at some dojos, I know some people who make it a point not to tap. I won't mention names, but they're just that toughness is ingrained in them.
Those are judokas, right? Those are judokas.
Yeah. And I mean, and this is at a club level, and for some, that's kind of ingrained. That toughness is ingrained in them. But that is a good question that I appreciate that you mentioned that. I'm gonna, in some of my future interviews with some of the judo.
And you know what I compare it to is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu tournaments at high levels. It's like you get these two black belts high level and they get caught and they tap, right? Live to fight another day. And for some weird reason, I see a lot of judokas not tap and make it a point of going out, and the arm bar is like fully stretched out and it's over. It's almost like it's foreign to them. Like it's like, you know, they're not accept. But in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, we tap all the time in training, right?
Right. I think it's probably more logical to tap, quite frankly. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like if you're,
yes,
you know,
yes,
who wants an injury, right? Who wants, and there are injuries in all combat sports, but particularly in judo. I'm just going to plug my computer in because I think it's low on battery power. But, you know, in addition to that, I wanted to follow up. So, you know, you don't want to do judo for BJJ. You just mentioned that you want to do judo
yes,
for judo. And
yes.
and that's again, this is really interesting that you're saying that, because I find from having spoken to a variety of different jiu-jitsu players, be it Brazilian jiu-jitsu players, that is, a lot of them tend to kind of they tend to dismiss that sport of judo for their own reasons, you know. And when they do try to learn the sport, it tends to be with an emphasis on the throwing technique, right? But you're saying you want to focus on judo for judo. What are your fellow members of your jiu-jitsu community telling you in regards to your pursuit of a judo black belt? Are you influencing them in a way? Are you kind of encouraging them? What's happening there?
Definitely. I mean, at the end of every training session for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I finish with 50, 30, 50 uchikomis with a training partner. Most of the time I get Professor Cameron to get in on this because he loves judo as well. We have an amazing judo national Cuban coach, Jose, third degree black belt, very high level. And it's great to hear from him and be, taught by him. And I think, I'm influencing a lot of people to finish with some uchikomis at the end of the session. And a lot of times when I train with the students, like blue all the way to black belts, they're like, they know I'm not going to pull guard. They know I'm not going to shoot in for singles and doubles. They know, like, for 2 years, I've been working my judo now and starting this journey. And then they compliment me, oh, that was a nice throw, or, oh, you're really working hard on that judo. And then I think I'm influencing a lot of them to do that. But like you said, a lot of BJJ guys, they train their judo for BJJ. And, that takes away a lot from the judo throws, like obviously like, giving your back and the way you're landing and this and that. But then if I would do that, I wouldn't feel like I would be a real judo black belt if I don't immerse myself, in the actual sport. And funny enough, I've done that for wrestling at the Montreal Wrestling Club. Unfortunately, around the same time that I lost my UFC fight, I dedicated myself, and I told myself, because after I fought UFC, I lost, and then I took a year off, and then I went back to pro MMA. And when I came back, I told myself one thing. I'm like, I'm not a BJJ guy anymore. I'm not a Muay Thai guy. I'm a wrestler. I bought the wrestling shoes. I got the wrestling outfit. I'm walking like a wrestler, talking like a wrestler, training like a wrestler. And I told myself mentally that I have to become the wrestler, because if I'm always training wrestling for MMA, it kind of like, it's not clean. It doesn't make it good. I'm not going to have pure good wrestling. And the missing component in my MMA game was the takedown aspect and the wrestling. So I told myself mentally, I'm like, I'm walking like a wrestler. I'm talking like a wrestler. I train wrestling. I'm not going to stop doing BJJ or Muay Thai, but whenever I'm training wrestling, I'm not thinking of MMA. I'm not thinking of the choke and the guillotines. There's no such thing. It's like, you're going for the pin, you're a wrestler. So I had to immerse myself. And that's how my wrestling game got to really high level. Of course, training at Montreal Wrestling Club with like amazing MMA guys like George St. Pierre and Rory and Olympian wrestlers, world champion wrestlers that are all there. So that's how I was able to really become good at wrestling. I saw a great result. So I want to take that and apply it to my judo game.
Dude, that's again, this is really fascinating to hear that you fully had to immerse yourself and almost temporarily suspend these other sports that philosophies that you were accustomed to, and that immersion was really important to you. Now, do you tell as far as your competitive, your students who are competitors, be it in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, boxing, because you guys do it all at your gym,
Yeah.
and now judo. Like, do you tell them that the importance of fully immersing into one style, or so you actually enforce that sort of, or encourage that?
Yeah, I try to, especially for the MMA guys, because like, for lack of better words, sometimes they like bastardize the technique, or like, you know what I mean? It's not clean. It's not very technically proficient in that sport. And they change a lot of things of the technique. But it's like, let's take, for example, like, I don't know, like Osotogiri, like, you know, that move, you know, like you could change it and make it into BJJ or make it into MMA, so on and so forth. But if you don't even know the origin of the move is judo, so why don't you start at the where it came from? It came from judo. So it's like, you know, learn that technique and then get good at it, and then you can change it for whatever style you're fighting in competition. For BJJ, you know, maybe the MMA grip's going to be a little bit different. You're going to have to watch out for, you know, the knee and so on and so forth. So I feel it's like I pass it down to all the fighters, especially if they have a hard time in the areas. Like, we have a couple fighters that like their wrestling is really not there. And I'm like, okay, like, you know, work on your wrestling, but like try to become the wrestler, you know, like, be that, right?
Interesting. Quick follow-up. In your opinion, is it better to be a specialist, or to specialize in one niveau, or sorry, in one area, of like, for example, in mixed martial arts, if you were to build a fighter up, is it better to have a specialist to start off with, as in, you know, a specialist in the double leg takedown who wrestled at a collegiate level in freestyle wrestling, or is it better to have an athlete who's or a generalist, in other words, someone who's good all around but not necessarily in depth enough to be sophisticated in one aspect? Well, what's, if you had to pick between option A being that of a specialist versus B being that of a generalist, which one would you pick, and why?
Man, that's a tough question. That's a good question and a very tough question. I want to go to, like, obviously my all-time favorite, Georges St-Pierre. A lot of people say like he's the jack of all trade and stuff like that, but I don't know. I feel that he's a really good wrestler. Like, a lot of people, you know, at the Montreal Wrestling Club said, like, you know, he could have been like close to the Olympic level of wrestling. So it's like, he's not really a jack of all trade, is he? If he's a specialist in wrestling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he worked obviously super hard on his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And then his striking is top level as well. So that's a really, really hard question. I'd like to say jack of all trade, a generalist. That'll be my answer. And the reason is, if that person would meet a specialist, then we would game plan away from that. So say my guy is a generalist. He's good all around, but not great at one thing. And then he's fighting a BJJ guy that's great at BJJ. Well, then we're going to switch it up. We're going to work a lot of sprawls, stick and move, sprawl and brawl, and then make it that fight and not go to the ground at all. Right. So I think the odds are better on a generalist because they're good all the way around instead of just being good at one spot.
Now, you've been around for quite some time in this area, and you've coached so many different students, from young children to you know, people in their 50s and 60s. And you've observed a lot of different athletes, as far as those who are screened for competition, be it in Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and mixed martial arts. On this topic, following up on this generalist versus specialist, who do you think is more keen and more adaptable to learning quicker, a specialist or a generalist? In other words, like, let's say you have a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt at your dojo who wants to do MMA, and who excels at, let's say his thing is I don't know, like triangle choke. Like, this person can triangle choke anyone from any angle. He'll jump right into it. You know what I mean? But like, he or she wants to transition to professional mixed martial arts, versus say someone who's just a freak athlete but doesn't have any finesse in as far as technique, and they have potential, but they don't, in terms of strength and flexibility, they have that athleticism, but they don't have a refined process to their fighting. Who is more versatile in learning and being coached? Just, I know I'm just following up with what you're saying here as far as the generalist.
Yeah, I like the generalist, you know, like that's an expert. Like that's the thing, right? If the two guys are green and they're just starting off, you know, I feel that maybe the specialist of that triangle, like in the MMA game, like let's take a look at the triangle. You got to worry about the ground pound. What about the slant? You know, it changes the whole game. The guy is a specialist at the triangle in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu setting. But in an MMA, I don't know if you ever seen this picture. It was in Argentina. I fought this guy. His nickname was the Pitbull.
The Pitbull, yes. I'm going to ask you about him later. Yeah, go ahead.
He lifted me right up. And then I saw him in his last fight. I studied him. He slammed the guy, and then the guy choked him. So then as he lifted me up, I'm like, okay, I'm covering my head, getting ready for my break fall, you know, keeping the chin tucked in. I'm just waiting for him to slam me so I can finish the choke. And he didn't. He kept me in the air for a good 2 minutes. And then we were fighting in the ring, and he decided to almost threw me out of the ring and hold me up on the turnbuckle. And then I lost the triangle when they reset it at me and this and that. But yeah, like that kind of thing, like a BJJ triangle specialist, like there's no way he would have been able to like train for that, or he'd be completely out of his element for that. So the generalist, I feel that, you know, it's nice if the guy is green, and then, you know, we can build and we can make him into a specialist. And I'm giving him like wrestling and judo and Muay Thai and boxing and BJJ and catch wrestling and all these moves. And then you can kind of see where he's going to be. And then he can become a specialist, you know, later on. Right. And I feel with like fight time, he'll be maybe more well-rounded to be able to deal with all these facets.
Really interesting. Now I'm going to move on to a different topic here. Obviously, let's talk about this pandemic, this COVID-19 pandemic. I'm not necessarily interested in talking about the politics of this subject matter. Instead,
that's good. Politics either, so thank you for that.
All good, brother, all good. But as far as this, how it's impacting the community, you know, these are a community of martial artists of different styles and whatnot. How do you think these lockdowns has impacted competitors, particularly, let's say, the BJJ community? Like, what are your competitors saying about this lockdown?
I have a great kid, Jeremy, and when the pandemic happened, he's like, okay, well, I can't compete anymore, so might as well teach. So then he helped me with all these classes, teaching Zoom classes when it was full lockdown. So we taught on Zoom virtually to all our kids and adults program, and he really stepped up. And then after that, he was like, okay, like now I'm really itching to compete. And then when we reopened, he was like, okay, there's obviously no competitions are going to happen. So he went to Texas to compete. He went to Pan Am's and all that. So it's great to see some people take this and show heart and, you know, go forward and get after it. Professor Nick, my partner, Papa Nick, he's in the best shape he's ever been. He is crushing me on the mat nonstop. And then, yeah, he's the first one on the BJJ mat. And then he's the last one pumping iron. Like all these young bucks and these guys are done our jiu-jitsu training, and then they just go home. And then Nick's pumping iron in the gym and doing his workouts. He really took this pandemic and like said like, okay, I'm tired of being out of shape. And, you know, he's an owner, so you got to lead from the front. And he took this situation that we're in and just like crushed it. So it's nice to see some people. And then I have the opposite. I have some fighters that were saying, you know, this and that, and they're not in the gym. You know, it's so easy now. It's easier to make excuses now not to show up to the gym and train because there's so much things going on and roadblocks, right? And with Nick, he just and then now Nick is in Orlando, and he's going to be competing at the World's Masters. Wow. So it's like so for the whole lockdown, he's like training, and we're lucky to own the gym. So Nick would go and pump iron and train. And then when we reopened, he hasn't skipped a day for training, and he's in the best shape of his life, technically and physically.
That's incredible. I wish him all the best at the tournament, and hopefully he makes the podium. But it sounds like he really turned this situation into a positive one for his health, as you mentioned. Now, give us your thoughts. You mentioned virtual teaching. What's that like for martial arts? What are the pros and cons? Just give us kind of a summary.
That was tough when so Nick had that idea, and then everybody started doing it through that when the lockdown happened, and it was tough. I would be here pretty much. I cleared my basement a little bit and then put this Zoom iPad on like we are here, and then I would lead the Muay Thai classes, and it was pretty cool because I had to work out as well. I had to do the shadow boxing with them and stuff like that. Sometimes I would stop and go up to the camera and then check on everybody, the screens, and little Billy, let's go do some more push-ups and keep those hands up, Johnny. And for the kids' class, it was great because a lot of parents told me that that was the one thing they were looking forward to. And a week or two in, I didn't want to do that. I was really reluctant with that. And then Nick started doing them. So I was like, okay, I got to pull my weight as well and start helping out with teaching. He can't teach all the classes. So I would do all the Muay Thai classes. And it got me shadowboxing, got me sweating. And then 2 weeks in, Garmamie, I was like, that was the one thing, like I was stuck at home with my wife. Like it's all good, but like, I wanted to see other people. So then I would log on our Zoom channel, and I had 30 students on there and be like, hey, what's up, guys? And it was a highlight of my day.
Wow.
And then when we reopened, I had so many parents come to the dojo. And then obviously the kids are doing their grappling dummy training and so on, and social distancing or sibling training. And then they were like, man, like during the lockdown, thank God you guys were doing the Zoom classes, because that was that one physical activity like some of the kids were looking forward to. And even adults, a lot of adults, like they're stuck at home. Some of them are alone. They don't have a significant other or whatever. And then they would log on and see my face, and I would tell them to do burpees and do jab, cross, hook, kick, and all this good stuff. And that was their highlight of the day. And funny enough, I wasn't a fan of it at the beginning, but then I got the flow and I was like, okay. And I'm writing down all my class plans and all the rounds, what I'm going to teach. And I'm going like deep strategy and techniques and technical stuff and a little bit of fitness. And it was really fun to do, given the circumstances, obviously.
And obviously, as you mentioned, your community is really appreciative of that. People want to train. People want to feel good. It's been a very challenging year for many people in a variety of ways, obviously. In some previous interviews that I've had, there's been the topic of mental health that's been discussed. A lot of people are feeling very depressed during this time. And I think just being able to do something physical virtually, of course, like any martial arts you guys offer is good for the brain and the heart and the soul. Do you think now, a lot of people I'm hearing different stories or different angles to this one here. Post the pandemic, let's say once things are back to normal, fingers crossed, whatever that normal is, do you think students are going to come back to the dojos and train? Are people like going to get back to that normal routine they once had post pandemic?
We'll see, but so far we've had a lot of signups, to be honest, and it's pretty crazy. I think maybe it has to do with like people maybe being like cabin fever, because I see people come in and they sign up for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or Muay Thai class, and then they have no idea what they signed up for. So that tells me that they're on their phone or on the internet and whatever, and they see an activity going on, and they're so like, like a lot of things, like I don't know about like soccer or hockey or any of this kind of like fun stuff that's going on. I don't think it is going on. And they're like, oh my God, like I don't even know what this is, but I'm going to sign up. And then they show up and they're like, oh, wow, I guess this is martial arts. So the signups has been pretty good so far. I feel for us being in a pandemic and having to have all these rules and regulations to go through. obviously with the COVID and extra cleaning and extra procedures that we have to do under our PSO. But yeah, I think I'm hoping that people will come back to the martial art. We have a lot of new people. The people I'm a little bit more worried is, like you said, the people that had that martial art training in, and then, COVID happened, huge bump in the road. And then, a lot of things are affected. And I hope those students stay true to the martial art and endeavor and come back at it eventually when they're ready, of course. Everybody, yeah.
Just to follow up on that, obviously, some people, may want to continue virtually. As far as the business of martial arts and delivering that service, is the virtual option still going to be available for students at your dojo, for example?
At our dojo,
are you going to do a mixed hybrid approach where you can come in and train physically? And I say that because the mere fact that you can log in from home and, get a good, decent workout, if it's boxing, you know what I mean? As far as in terms of the cardio and that endurance, like, people love convenience. There's many industries that are built around convenience, right? And being able to stay home and to access online, for some industries, it's been remarkable, right? So for yours, as far as the martial arts world, is this something that you think might still be there, this being the virtual option training?
So how it went is, as soon as we opened back up our doors, myself and Nick tried to make it work, because we had 50-50, 50% of people were ready to come back. The other 50 were not. And we wanted to continue helping out the people that, maybe have, I had these kids that have their grandpa, grandma living with them, right? So immunocompromised, that can't attend to class. So we did try, but only, unfortunately, there's only one of me and one of Nick. And it was very difficult. And we did it for a couple months, Garmamie. It was very tough, because I would have all the kids online here, and then, like, I'm looking at the camera, but then over there, there's like 10 kids that are actually in the dojo training on their grappling dummies. So it's like, hey, like, and then when I'm talking to you, then I'm not focusing on them, and then they're full. So logistically, it was very, very difficult. And then we did try for a while to accommodate and keep up the virtual classes, but it was very tough. If we do go back in lockdown, we're 100% doing it, because we had such a great success and everybody was so happy with it. But unfortunately, we had to pause the virtual training. I know there's other dojos in Ottawa that offer that. And we did recommend all our students. We're affiliated with Gracie Barra, is an amazing jiu-jitsu team, as you know, and they have a lot of online access. So what we did is we're taking care of our students through that, and being like, okay, here's my login info, my password, go and do your virtual classes with Gracie Barra. They teach every day, and they're doing the virtual thing, and it's a wealth of knowledge. They have like Braulio Estima teaching them, and like, wow, the best of the best, right? So that's for the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu side. Unfortunately, for the Muay Thai side, I'll probably have to, I could get on filming classes and putting them on YouTube and having our members access that. That was one of the ideas to do. But again, like, right now, the business is pretty good at the dojo. It's really busy, especially with the limited classes and stuff like that. We added more classes. So now we're just trying to survive and keep our business alive. We were close to shutting down. We were very, very close.
Christ. Yeah. Are you serious? Man.
Yeah, we were close. It all came down to our landlord, because if they would have told us, no, they're not doing the rent subsidy, then there would have been no way for me and Nick to take, especially at the Barhaven location. It's like, yeah, it's right in the strip mall. It's owned by Ryokan, so they're huge, right? They don't care really about the little guys, but we lucked out. Our landlord said, like, yeah, we're applying for the rent subsidy, and we'll help you guys out. So we got lucky.
Yeah, no, that's really good to hear. Because I'm reading more and more that dojos, gyms, fitness centers across the country, when it comes to martial arts, that is, are shutting down.
You heard about Arcana in Ottawa?
Oh yes. I interviewed Jamie Hahn.
Yeah.
In regards to that, and that was a shocker, because this region, as you know, because you're one of those pioneers as far as building up the scene here. There's a lot of really, really good gyms, all sorts of gyms, different styles of martial arts. And, for whatever reason, Ottawa gets, has a thriving martial arts community. The martial arts, it's a business, folks. You pay for quality service, and there's a lot of options in the city. And the thought that like some of these gyms might be closing, I think is I mean, restaurants are closing. Various for various industries or various businesses, are closing. And I just hope that most gyms can somehow hold on during this transition, because they play an important part of the community for not everyone becomes a competitor like yourself. Not everyone has the opportunity or the capability or the skills to travel the world like you have, to compete and to have these incredible experiences, but they have the opportunity to train, right, to learn a new skill at a recreational level, to attain personal goals, be it fitness goals, be it self-defense. There's so many stories out of dojo. If you've never been, you see the mishmash of Ottawa, right, or of any city, all sorts of personalities.
It's crazy how Ottawa is such a fighting, or not a fighting town, but also a martial art town. It's crazy how many dojos and martial art gyms there is in little Ottawa. It's always been like people ask and stuff, and it's like, man, like Ottawa's no joke. Like the boxing, the judo, the Takahashi, the Kerwin, and the Beaver boxing, and Jean-Yves Thériault, the Duvers brothers. Like, man, like Tai Lee with Taekwondo is amazing. Right. So it's like, it's crazy how Ottawa is a really heavy like so many martial art dojos.
It is, and I mean, for yourself, you're the first fighter to have fought in the UFC, from this region, to have made it to the biggest stage of them all as far as professional mixed martial arts, which is the Ultimate Fighting Championship, obviously. Now, looking back at your career, we're going to transition from that previous topic of the pandemic to you in particular, your career. Looking back at your career, what's the highest moment when you think back? What's the highest moment?
The highest moment in my career, oh wow, there's been a lot. Like I fought a lot of pro Muay Thai, and very proud of fighting at the Lumpini Stadium in Bangkok, which is an amazing, like the top of the top fight there, and winning that fight. I've lucky enough to fight at the King's birthday, in front of the King and Queen of Thailand, and winning as well, representing Canada during that fight card. For the pro Muay Thai. For MMA, I mean, I want to say make it to the UFC, but I didn't win it. And funny enough, going back on what we talked about, that goal setting sheet that I wrote down when I was 14, 15 years old, I said make it to the UFC. I never said win in the UFC. So going back on it, maybe I should have wrote that. I mean, everybody's, proud and happy. And it's like, man, it shows that you made it to the show. And what was great is how I made it too, is I went to try out for the Ultimate Fighter season in Charlotte in North Carolina. And then there was like 300 people. Bruce Leroy was there with his big afro. And it was going to be, the coaches were GSP and Josh Koscheck. So I was like, man. So I went to try. There's like 300, 400 pro MMA guys there. I'm in line. I make the first cut, make the second cut. Then, I'm doing pads in front of Dana White, yelling and rah, 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 going crazy. And then there's the rolling component, like I'm catching guys, showing off my jiu-jitsu. And then I make that cut, and they're like, okay, we're going to fly out to Vegas for the final interview with Spike TV. At the time was Spike TV that was hosting the Ultimate Fighter show. And then I don't know what I didn't say or said. Maybe I wasn't right for the TV, but they told me, they told me, okay, leave, and then we'll call you if you make it. And then they called me 2 weeks later. I'm back in Ottawa. I go in the office, I get on the phone call, and they're like, yeah, sorry, you're not going to be on the Ultimate Fighter show. So huge letdown. Like my whole, like, I was like, man, like I'm 25, I have like a 7-1 pro record. I'm looking sharp. Like that was my goal. That was my in. I messed it up. 2 weeks after, I get the phone call, Dana White, he's like, okay, you're on for UFC in Vegas, UFC 119, you know. I was like, I was so happy because I talked to George at the time. I was wrestling a lot with him at the Montreal Wrestling Club, and he told me, he's like, you don't want to go in the house because it's a really bad contract. It's a really shitty contract. The guys, you know, you're not making good money and this and that. And he was very happy that I didn't make it to the Ultimate Fighter show because, you know, I made it the real way. You know, they asked me to come fight, not like fight on the house and then get a contract. They gave me a 4-fight contract deal, and you're like, you're a UFC fighter. We want you on your roster. So that was the highest of the high that day. To answer your question, I was like, man, that's amazing. You know, it was a big down. I didn't make it into the Ultimate Fighter show, but I got a UFC 4-fight contract deal. You know, starting with UFC 119 and then the UFC 120 in London at the O2 Arena. So that was something. That moment I was very, very happy.
That's really interesting. I was unaware of some of those details. That's fascinating. Now, follow-up question to it, if you don't mind me asking. You don't have to answer it if you don't want. What's the lowest, as far as what's the lowest moment in your career? If we're gonna do the high, we might as well do the low.
Might as well do the low. So fighting career-wise, so obviously, you know, fighting, and then losing in the UFC would be a big one. I retired right after. I felt like I let Ottawa down. I let the city down. I was the first one to make it. You know, the pressure I had and the crazy interviews and this and that, and it all led to me being 0-2 in the UFC and then getting cut. Obviously, they reserved the right, even though it was a 4-fight contract deal. You know, 0-2, and then that's it. I was pretty upset, you know, and I was pretty bummed out. So I took a year off of retirement. That was my first retirement. I retired twice. This one's the forever. But yeah, and then I took a year off, and then I had to find the fun back into training. And for me, it became more of like a job, and I was like very like, yeah, I just had to get the fun back in there. And then I started fighting again. And I think the lowest of the lows would have been one of my last MMA fight. I was matched up against Leo Santos, and I mean,
is this the Leo Santos?
Yeah,
Jesus.
yeah. He choked me out. He choked me out in the first round, and the lowest of the lows was going into the fight and having my coach at the time not believe in me, and then just putting me out there to fight. So it was very tough for me because I felt like he didn't care about my fighting record or my head or anything, and matching me up with this guy. And then I think 2 or 3 months later, he got a call from Russia. I was supposed to fight this like guy 8-0 at 185 pounds. I never fought at 185, and I was gonna go to Russia and fight this guy. I got cut in training, and it didn't happen, thankfully, because I would have probably got destroyed. And then a year later, I think after that, I was supposed to fight Alex Pereira. It's like, you know, again, huge guy. You know, I shouldn't be fighting those guys. And as a fighter, you hope that your coach and your manager can protect. And that's what I want to be as a good coach and a good manager, is you have to protect the fighter from himself. And at the time, I thought I was invincible. You know, even though I got knocked out before in combat, I was like, okay, I got my chin back, and I'm working hard on my striking, and that's not going to happen again. And I can fight anybody, anywhere. I was even supposed to fight Yodsu Clive Fairtex at one point. I was very close to fight with him. And it's like, and then going now being in a coach's shoes right now, talking to you, it's like, man, like I could have got really, really hurt badly. Like I shouldn't be in the same cage and ring as these guys. These guys are like legends, you know? And then, I mean, I did fight another great legend, Cosmo Alexander, and survived 5 rounds with him, but it wasn't the prettiest fights. I did what I could, but yeah, that was the lows of the lows, is after my first retirement in the UFC getting cut. And then after that, things being changed and not being taken care of as a fighter, I felt my career went down the crapshoot, because, you know, it was just like throwing me out there to the wolves, right? Not really caring if I win or lose.
Wow. It's
I haven't told anybody that, but
this is again. I appreciate the raw honesty here, sir. It's almost midnight on on a Monday night, and I'm hearing this stuff. And I have. It's funny. You've answered most of my questions. I have just two left, but my 12th question here was: as a coach, what values guide your approach to coaching? And I think you've answered it through and through in this conversation. And on the theme of like fighters safety or your student safety, how do you integrate safety and well-being in their, like, especially for the competitors, because you know what it's like in terms of that pressure, the risks involved. We don't, as fight fans, we don't really understand the scope of the risks involved with these sports. I mean, be it grappling sports, wrestling, judo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or MMA or Muay Thai. I'm talking about concussions. I'm talking about head trauma. Speak to us on that, because I don't know how openly people talk about this issue, particularly competitors and recreational practitioners as well.
The fighter-coach relationship has to be honest. It has to be respectful. The old days of like, you're my sensei, so I'll do whatever, this and that. It has to be 50-50. It has to be give and take. And that goes down to like business as well, like taking a cut of UFC, of a fighter, a percentage of his purse, to training, to taking care of him, like everything. It has to be transparent. We got to be on the same page, and we got to have each other's back, and not only like, the student, the fighter representing me, and, like I'll do my best, sensei, and I'll get this win and this and that. It's like, okay, that's great. That's awesome that you're a dedicated student and fighter and you want to go to the top, and I can take you there. But you have to, we have to respect each other in a way that, like, I'm going to take care of you, and I'm going to, we can trust each other. And then, like I said, like the for the fighters, like, you got to protect them from themselves, right? They're fighters. They want to go in there, and as a coach, you're on the sideline. It's not your face, it's not your head that's getting mashed in. So it's like, we gotta be serious. It's gotta be serious training. And if the fighter's slacking off, then sorry, you're not fighting. I gotta protect you. You're not ready for this fight. And the buildup is very important too. Like, I've seen like great kids, like I say kid, but yeah, like Fred Stonehouse, right? He's an amazing. I thought he was going to be the next one to make it to the show in UFC, and his last fight, he got badly concussed, taken out on a stretcher. He shouldn't have been fighting this guy. He was outweighed, and then there goes his career. Like, if he wouldn't have had that fight, who knows? I legit thought he could be the next one making it to the UFC out of Ottawa, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the buildup of fights and the setup and the training. Everything's got to be, it's got to be taken seriously, right? Especially if they want to make it to the big show. And the fighters can't be like brainwashed or, taken advantage of by the coaches. That's a thing that nobody touches on, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, I appreciate your your insight on that, and from your experience. When we speak of also competitors, for the most part, a lot of these high level elite competitors who want to go on to fight at the biggest stage of them all, be it the UFC here in North America, like, do you think people think of life after competition? Like, is that like, for example, you know what I'm saying? Like, in terms of, like, for you, for example, when you were in your mid-20s, did you think of life post competition?
No.
You didn't think. How would you say, like, for the most part, because all these people, is that something that crosses their mind? That's that question. Like, well, what am I going to do after I'm competing, considering the risks I'm taking? Like, is that a discussion that happens?
No, it's not even. And it's the focus for me. The focus was so much on making it to the big show, and then that was it. So you have to have that kind of focus. I mean, it's great to have the backup plan, like look at football players, right? Like after their career, like they don't, or say they get cut, it's like a big thing. NFL, not for long, right? So
Yikes.
for fighters, it's a big thing. And for me, I was so like tunnel vision and focused on my dream, and then things kind of after the fight and stuff like that, that's when I took a step back and be like, okay, like fighting, like like the paychecks is not that good, like I can't make a living out of that after I'm done fighting. What am I going to do? So opening up a dojo and passing it down was the next logical thing for me. And I was very lucky to find a great partner like Nick to be able to do that with him. And he took that step because he competed with me on that same fight card that we debuted on. And then he took that step much early on after a couple competitions, went more on the business side of the martial arts. And he's very, very experienced in that side, just because he stopped competing earlier than me, right, in the MMA world. So yeah, I was happy to have him as a partner to to help me out with that side of the business. But no, I don't think a lot of fighters have that thought, and then none of the coaches even have probably approached that because they're so focused on the fight and making it to the big show and being world champion. And it's like they tunnel vision on that, and they don't see past what's going to happen when you're 35, 40 years old and you retire fighting, you can't fight anymore, right? So but those are great ways to set things up. It's goal setting.
Yes, for sure. No doubt. Last question for you. Again, I really appreciate this interview. It's been quite frankly, it's been an amazing interview. I feel like I've learned so much more about you and your philosophy as a fighter, and your journey, quite frankly, in this, starting from the age of 14 till now. In like looking at all this, as far as like your career, when you look back, is there a series of reoccurring themes and lessons learned that emerge time and time again? Like, do you see any like patterns in your story as a fighter that you think of and reflect on? I know it's kind of like a philosophical, theoretical question, but I guess what I'm asking is, when you look back, because you're lucky, you documented this from the age of 14, you put it out into the universe, and the universe, or you know what I mean? It is what it is. That's the power of the intent, and the universe will conspire for you. I'm mispronounced or missaying the line, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
What are some of the recurring themes in your story as a fighter?
The big thing, I think, is like I told you, how I made it to the show is like the good karma, right? And putting it out there in the universe. And if you work hard for it and plan it, it's going to come to fruition, right? Eventually with hard work and good karma, a good combination. It's like, I got cut I didn't make it to the Ultimate Fighter show, but 2 weeks later, they send me a 4-fight contract deal with the UFC, and working hard throughout that, and then, retiring and opening up the business and passing it down. So I think a big thing is like good karma, being a good person, training hard, putting out there in the universe, like good things. And then, sometimes you don't see it, for a long time, but then it eventually comes back to you. So for my fight career, I think a lot of it is there's ups and downs, just like every fighter's career, for sure. I got really lucky with like not a lot of injuries, and was able to build it up and do my BJJ and my Muay Thai and then put it all together. And that was all a big plan and built up, and it came to fruition with 10 years, right? It took me since I wrote down that goal. So that's a big thing. Like a lot of people, they say the goals and do this and do that, but to write it down is a very powerful thing.
And to make it happen, man. You made your dreams happen. And that's, again,
wow.
Dude, that's remarkable, man. I just want to say thank you once again for this interview. I've really enjoyed it. I don't want to take up any more of your time, but where can people find your gym? Tell us about your gym, where it's located, and any social media info, website, etc. Plug the gym.
Plug it. Some plugs sounds good. So we have a Barra location. We do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai for kids and adults there. Amazing location, Stranded and Greenbank. So a really good location. And then we have our HQ that just opened a year ago, coming up on a year ago in January, which has taken off. It's a beautiful gym. I have an amazing bag set up. You'll have to come in and try and check it out.
Well, I've seen the videos, man. I've seen you.
Yeah, my new
videos.
toy
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
bag and all that. It's a really nice gym. The only thing we're missing is the crash mat, but that's coming up soon
Nice.
to help with my judo training. But yeah, definitely like the headquarters is at the city center, so right next to Artisan, off City Center Avenue, and yeah, really cool, like a nice ambiance gym, like kind of like a warehouse style, like big and open, but like modern, not like sketchy warehouse.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely good vibes when you enter both gyms. You know, we have great general managers and front desk guys, and myself and Nick are there. So we want to try to light up the room and have good positive martial art training. Everybody's out there to help each other out, and you can really, the vibes don't lie, you know. So once you enter, it's like, you know, a lot of people are, you know, scared, as you know, right? Martial arts, it's like, well, I'm going in a dojo with a whole bunch of fighters, and you know, and then they enter, and then everything's good from there. So yeah, those are the two gyms that I train out with myself and Nick from Gracie, Baja, Ottawa, and then Barrhaven Martial Arts Center.
Well, great location, the one in city center. It's like right in the heart and soul of Ottawa. So that's outstanding. Thank you very much for your time. It's almost midnight, so I'm going to let you go, brother. But thank you very much for your time, and we'll speak soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me. Have a good night.